Welcome to Accounting Life with Jotham Tai. Today's episode is the importance of recharging in your career. Our guest today is Samee Vohra, corporate finance at Atlassian. On this episode, we talk about the importance of taking a break from your career and how to make the most of your time away. Now, our host, Jotham Tai.
Hey, Samee, how's it going? Thanks for joining us on the Accounting Life podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me, Jotham.
Great to have you here. You and I obviously know each other for a while, and word on the street is that you had a chance to do sabbatical and do something that a lot of accountants and finance professionals are either looking to do or wish to do. So I definitely want to ask you about that. But before we dive into that specific topic, Samee, if you can just give us a quick background on your experience, both on the accounting and the finance side, and then we'll segue into the sabbatical.
Yeah, definitely. So like a lot of accountants, I started my career in public accounting. I was at EY for about 3 years. That led to the natural jumping off point where a lot of folks after about a year as a senior leave into the industry. So I went and joined Glassdoor on the revenue accounting side. That was my first introduction into not just the broader corporate functions, but also the makeup of a corporate finance team. So at Glassdoor, I worked a lot with the FP&A teams over there on their revenue models and just answering questions and getting an understanding of what they were doing. And it was all work I found really interesting. And just my curiosity kind of led me to this point where I ended up making the jump into the FP&A team at Glassdoor. It was a great first opportunity. I went from revenue accounting to expense finance and got a lot of introductions into the different parts of the business, managing budgets for 5-6 different departments, really seeing how they operate, how they, like what their strategies are, just really how they think. And then after a couple of years on the finance team at Glassdoor, I ended up moving over to Salesforce. I was looking for something, I wanted a different experience coming after that. I wanted something a little bit bigger in scale in terms of the finance team. But also a lot of the work that I was doing was very much in the weeds, and I wanted to elevate myself into more high-level strategic work. And so I joined the corporate finance and strategy team at Salesforce. There I worked on the close and the consolidation side of our short-term corporate team. So a lot of that was managing the close process, reporting results for the forecasts and earnings to our CFO and the leadership team. And it hit the spot. It was the exact opposite end of the spectrum compared to a lot of the work that I was doing at Glassdoor, but really gave me that well-rounded experience into the two different sides of finance. Early 2022, as you kind of alluded to earlier, I decided I wanted to take a bit of a sabbatical. So I took some time off. We can talk about it a little bit more, but
well, before we do, actually, I'd love to just kind of recap, and I think this is a good build up to the sabbatical part of the story here, the Samee story. But I do, a lot of times in accounting, you kind of force yourself to just like specialize in one area. But what I really like about your background is, as you mentioned, like most accountants, you start off in public accounting. Then you went to Glassdoor, worked on the revenue side. So I know you know, partner on some 606 stuff. And then you went on to FP&A, a different function, different kind of mindset. So instead of recording transactions, it was more on like analytics. And you did it on the other side of the P&L, on the expense side. And then you did Salesforce and was involved more on the consolidation and close process and analytics. So I guess, I want to bring that up because something I always highlight for our audience is the opportunities that you get within the accounting and finance profession to, really touch on different areas of the balance sheet, P&L, and so on. And, another dimension that you had, which I think is unique and special, is that you have experience Glassdoor. Back then it was, pre-IPO based, and then Salesforce, larger organization. So I think accounting and FP&A and finance affords you the luxury of exploring these opportunities, but I know your story doesn't end there. There's another opportunity and an itch that you got that I want to hear about. So I'll let you continue on with the sabbatical. I'm really excited to dig into that part.
Yeah, and before we even get to that, kind of just adding to what you're saying, there's needs for everyone in accounting and in finance. You need people who really specialize in a certain area and go really deep into it, but you also need people who have experience across different parts of the finance org and different parts of the P&L. And so I've always thought, as my career has progressed, I really dig deep into the parts that I'm currently working on and learn them. But often I'll find that something comes up that's interesting and catches my attention and that I also want to learn next. And this, again, will come back to the sabbatical a bit, and then I'll get interested in a different part of the business or a different part of the finance org and want to learn that and want to go over. And I think I found that it's added a lot of value and well-roundedness to my professional career as well. I've been in roles where they valued the fact that I come from an accounting background with FP&A experience because they're looking for somebody who can bridge the gap between those two functions. And so a lot of people, and I felt this as well, feel like they really need to hone in and dive deep into one area, but there's really a lot of opportunity and need for people who move into different parts of the org based off of their interests.
Well, take it for a guy that has been around the profession for 20 years, but I can assure you, when I first started my career, the variety would be looked at less favorably than it does. And now it's like almost a requirement, right? To your point, there's a high level of collaboration between all these different teams. And the more experience you have in these different areas, the more competent people are in your ability to bridge those functions. So yeah, totally with you there. And that's a really good point.
Yeah. So kind of moving towards the sabbatical. So I started Salesforce in around early 2020. I always tell this story, but when I interviewed, the conversations were about us returning to the office in 2 weeks, maybe a month, max like 2 months. Obviously that was not the case, and lockdown happened, everything shut down, and we were working remotely for almost 2 years or a little over 2 years. And that just led to a completely different environment in the world and in the workplace as well. I think I remember trying to figure out, how am I going to set up my workplace at home, but also my wife needs to work and we need to find something big enough. My monitor was at the end of my bed. You could see my bed in the back of my screen. Like, there was just this 2-year period where everything had kind of blurred into one big blob. And for me, at least, the line between work and home had kind of disappeared. And come early 2022, when things started opening up again, I'd taken that as a bit of an opportunity to take some time off and just reset a little bit, recharge a little bit. I think those 2 years were taxing on everybody. And I was luckily fortunate enough to be able to be in a position where I could take time off and have the support to travel, visit family, visit friends, just catch up on a lot of events, life events that I missed out on for a couple of years during lockdown.
Yeah, well, and again, I would pin the luxury of being able to do that too, I think. And I'm an advocate, obviously, of the profession, but as an accounting and finance profession, being able to take time off and explore things does not, really prevent new opportunities for you as you come back, right? So I did the same thing myself, Sam, and I could totally relate. I don't know if I shared this story with you in the past, but when I left Responses, which was acquired by Oracle, I had just gone through a pretty brutal, 3-year stretch. Went through a pre-IPO, S1 filing, first year of SOX, ERP implementation, and it was 3 years of grind. I learned a lot, and that's, I definitely still to this day appreciate all the learnings that I acquired along the way. But I took a three-month break after I left Responses, and I just, in my case, I went to the Philippines, went to the beach, just like unwound. I actually got involved with a nonprofit too. And then a few months after that, I started Gapify. But yeah, I think a lot of what's on the news these days with the profession is the burnout, and the statistics are staggering. And one of the reasons why I was so excited to bring you into this podcast is because I think there's a message here that's important for our audience to hear, which is, dude, if you are like feeling like you're close to that tired phase, it's not a bad thing to maybe take a break and recharge. Recharging is important. I don't know if I would have had the energy to do what I'm doing now if I didn't take that break that I just mentioned. And I know in your case, the break consists of learning a new skill, Samee. So if you don't mind, I'd love to ask you a little bit more about that, or if you can describe like, what you did in that time off too.
Yeah. So I'm a huge proponent of taking breaks. I will probably take more breaks throughout the remainder of my career. And one of the things I've learned is during this break, I just found that I had so much more time and so much more energy to do some of the things that I've always wanted to learn or wanted to do that I never really had that time or energy for while I was working. Some of those are, one of those skills that you're referring to is I actually picked up coding during my time off, which was something I'd always had an itch to learn, but it took a lot of energy and time to reach a point where I felt comfortable that I was starting to understand the fundamentals and the mechanics and how software development, and specifically I spent a lot of time in web development, but how it all works. And that sabbatical is like what gave me this opportunity to do that. I've worked in the tech industry my entire career. I've always been surrounded by technology. I've been surrounded by software engineers, and I've worked at these companies where this is such a fundamental part of how the company exists, and never really had any understanding of it outside of a financial sense. And to me, I was always just curious and interested in not necessarily pursuing it from a professional capacity, but learning it because I wanted to scratch that itch. And the sabbatical gave me that opportunity to do that. And it allowed me to do it in a manner in which was very enjoyable. There was a period of time where I would just wake up in the morning while my wife went to work. I would go to work and just learn how to code for 6-7 hours a day and try to build stuff. And it was a lot of fun. It's gave me a lot of energy. It really like refreshed me. I was doing things that I wanted to do during my time off. And I think it's making me that much better on the flip side, like coming back into the profession now.
100%. And, when you think about like coding too, and just learning in general, in our adult lives, we really just don't get much of a chance to learn anything fundamentally new because we're so driven by our careers. And again, like sometimes when you just like put so much and exert so much energy in one place, you lose energy, and the ability to recharge, learn something new. Man, I can't imagine like how awesome that was. So I want to ask, because a lot of us accountants and FP&A folks in our audience probably knows very little about coding at all. So how hard is it, man? Like, is it logical like it is in accounting, or does it take more creative skills?
Yeah.
How did you find that experience?
Well, what I realized is that there's an entire world out there where you can kind of make whatever you want of it. And you kind of make a good point about the logic of coding. And that was one of the things that also drew me to it. Was when I started in finance and FP&A, one of my favorite parts initially was the logical problem solving, the model building, the formulas, the Excel, and there is a bit of overlap in the thought process that goes between those two types of things. And that's why part of the reason why I wanted to learn it. But I think I've come to learn that it's just this entire world where you can work on very technical aspects of something that are very problem solving and logical, but you can also be a developer who's focused more on front end, where creativity and design and all of that come into play. Or you could even be like a full stack developer where you're kind of balancing the two. You're balancing a lot of that logic with a lot of the creativity and design on the front end. And you can make whatever you want of it. There's folks who specialize in every single part of the spectrum. So it was really cool to see and like understand and learn that a little bit more.
Why am I getting like visuals of like Avatar, like the movie? It's just like a new world. You have designers, you have like back end, and I know some of these terms because obviously we run a software company ourselves, but I didn't even think about the notion that like coding is not just like one thing, right? And same with accounting and FP&A and finance, right? Like not everyone is an AP processor, not everyone is a SEC reporting person. There are so many different specialties, and for you to like jump in and kind of like explore that world must have been pretty cool.
It was pretty cool. And again, like I also thought the same thing before. I just thought a software engineer was a software engineer. I thought a developer was a developer. I had a lot of respect for them before. I have even more respect for them now. But it's just this very open-ended thing where it's similar to a lot of, I think, careers where there isn't necessarily an end point. Like you can go as deep as you want. You can go as broad as you want. And kind of tying that back in a little bit to what we were talking about earlier is you can do that in accounting and finance too. You can go very deep into one area. You can go a little bit more broad amongst different areas and be more of a generalist. But there are parallels, definitely. And it was just one of those things that was very interesting and fascinating to be able to spend time off learning and a bit more about. And for me, especially, I've always just been curious in learning and knowledge, and it doesn't necessarily need to be for a specific purpose, but I just feel like I have more knowledge and more perspective around the industry after having gone through that.
You mentioned something there that I think might be like a roadblock for some of the folks on our audience, which is, for accounting especially, our work papers are set up, right? We have to have a purpose and objective. Sometimes the purpose of doing something different is just to do something different, right? It doesn't have to lead to like another career path. It doesn't need to, translate into some kind of points in your career or life. I mean, I guess you could make the argument that points in life equals getting these different experiences. So, I think, as I think about where some of our fellow accountants are in their accounting journeys, I'm really looking at like some of the history that you mentioned. I'm looking at a time when, especially in tech, things were moving very quickly, and from 2010 to 2020, then the pandemic hit, and we were all kind of confined in our work from home bubbles, and then we're emerging out of that with a couple wonky things with the macro conditions and mass exodus in the profession. And I think about what you went through, taking a break, recharging, learning something new. How would you encapsulate, how incredibly valuable that must have been for you in your life, and probably for the longevity of your career?
Yeah. I think one of the things that I've like taken away is that I've always enjoyed finance. It's what I'm going to continue doing. It's what I want to do. But at a certain point, like work does take energy out of somebody over a long period of time. And for me, like these types of breaks, they help me maintain my like energy level and effort and ability to do my job well over a longer period of time. I've actually thought about this, and I think a lot of folks go from one job, and then when they find their next one, maybe have like a week or two off in between jobs, but it would be so beneficial. Like that's the perfect pivoting point where you could take a month or two off after you leave one place and start another. You're not really tied down to anything. And that would add so much energy, I think, back to a lot of folks who are feeling the burnout, and maybe might even be the reason that they're leaving one place for another. But for me, I just think that having those breaks, and it doesn't even necessarily need to be breaks. It could just be finding something that like helps you kind of relax or re-energize. It definitely promotes longevity in your career as well, and happiness throughout your career. Like I'm going back into the workforce as a much more re-energized person than I was when I left in early 2022 after just a lot of stress over a couple of years of the pandemic more than anything, and just like all of the uncertainty that brought. But I think like now I'm going to be a much better person going back into the workforce, and I'm going to do a much better job than had I not taken that break. So yeah.
That is so awesome. And again, like why I was so excited to have you on today's recording. It's underappreciated, like what rest, recharging can mean to a person's like overall happiness. It's not even all about, careers and career aspiration. It's just, it's what we should be doing as humans in life, right? Like growing and learning, and not just like getting energy sucked out of us. So, I really hope for the folks that listen to this podcast, that they take this story and maybe assess like where they're at and whether they can benefit from this type of break. And I guess on that note, and as we wrap up, Samee, like if you had to give advice to someone who is considering like taking a break to recharge and learn something new, like what kind of advice would you give that person on like how to go about doing it?
Yeah. I think a lot of us listening or talking today are accountants. We're pretty organized. We're pretty methodical. We're pretty on top of our things. I would say thinking it through, like understanding, for me, like I had to understand like what was my budget going to be, like what was going to change, what could I do to make sure that my time off lasted a certain amount of time and that I was comfortable during that time, and kind of just preparing for it. That was a big thing for me, was making sure that I understood going into the sabbatical, just like what my constraints were. Another thing which may or may not work for some people was I knew that the first couple months, like I did not want anything like planned. I just wanted like a couple months off where maybe I just stay home all day. Maybe I go out, maybe I like book a trip and go visit somebody. And for me, like that worked well for me. I know for a lot of other folks, like planning stuff out like to a T might be a bit more comfortable, and that's totally fine too. But I kind of took it as I'm going to take a couple months off where I'm allowed to do whatever I want. I'm allowed to feel lazy. I'm allowed to feel stagnant. And then after a certain period of time, I didn't want to go too long feeling lazy and stagnant. So kind of gave myself that time period and was like, okay, after that, I either need to figure out how to maintain some level of productivity, but like in a fun way. And that's what kind of got me into learning how to code. Or maybe I reassess and maybe it's time to, with this little break that I had and the fun time that I had, like now jump back into the workforce. And I would just say, think about a little bit about the constraints around the time that you're planning to take off, but also make sure you give yourself some time to be lazy and not do anything. And then maybe after that, think about what else you want to add on top of your break.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned that, and I'll recap because I think it is such a impactful advice. So what I heard you say was, if you're going to take a break, plan it out, right? Like know how you're going to cover that period of time from a budget perspective and other life planning perspectives. But within that plan, put a part of that plan where you're just like, there is no plan.
Yeah.
So part of your bigger plan is setting some time for no plan. And I think, especially if you're an accountant, you live and breathe structure and checklists and duty and discipline so much. I think that's incredible advice for people to just like let themselves go for a few weeks or a month or so.
And if you need structure, you said it well, let that structure be that you're structuring some time of no structure. And there you go.
You know what? I think we have to make t-shirts that say that, Sandy. I think that's such good advice. And I say that jokingly, but I mean, I think there's a lot of value with that. And yeah, Sandy, I've known you for a while, and just to see the level of energy and like you look fresh. I mean, I think just seeing you and talking to you today, it's pretty clear that this has been effective for you. So, clearly I have you on this podcast because I think this is important for our audience. And on that note, I thank you for sharing your story, Samee. Like, I definitely want to catch up with you and see how you're doing a few months from now. And looking forward to staying in touch.
Sounds good. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining, Samee.
Thanks for stopping by. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you want more information, please check us out at gapify.com, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.